Explosive claims in a new lawsuit accusing the White House, Fox News, its parent company, and a Republican donor of concocting a fake news story about the murder of a DNC staffer named Seth Rich. CNN senior media correspondent Brian Stelter has more.
There's a possibility this is a guy who provided to WikiLeaks all those DNC emails.
A false story peddled by Fox News could have fingerprints that reach all the way to the White House. A new lawsuit filed in federal court claims Fox concocted a story about the murder of 27-year-old DNC staffer Seth Rich and claims the White House had oversight.
If it was true that Seth Rich gave WikiLeaks the DNC emails, wouldn't that blow the whole Russia collusion narrative that the media has been pushing out of the water?
That is part of this pro-Trump conspiracy theory. Rich's family says his death has been exploited by right-wing media. At the center of the story is Ed Butowski, a wealthy Republican donor. Tuesday's suit, filed by Rod Wheeler, a Fox News contributor, claims Butowski and Fox were in cahoots, contriving a link between Rich and WikiLeaks. Wheeler worked with Butowski investigating Rich's death.
It's very consistent for a person with my experience to begin to think, well, perhaps there were some email communications between Seth and WikiLeaks.
Rich's family says that's not true. And D.C. police believe his killing was a botched robbery, nothing politically motivated. But that didn't stop Fox.
It sure doesn't look like a robbery. It looks like a murder.
After days of coverage back in May, the network retracted the story. Now, months later, Wheeler's explosive lawsuit says he was misquoted, defamed by Fox.
I do believe I was used as a pawn in this entire thing.
And his suit goes much further, claiming Butowski coordinated the phony story with the White House.
I think their goal, based on the emails and the voicemail messages that I got from Ed Butowski, was to debunk this Russian hacking narrative.
This whole idea that something was coordinated with Rod Wheeler, that's absolute nonsense.
This text message from Butowski to Wheeler is one of the suit's most eye-popping claims. Not to add any more pressure, but the president just read the article. He wants the article out immediately. It's now all up to you, but don't feel the pressure. Butowski now says he was just kidding around.
This was tongue-in-cheek, talking, just texting, wasn't serious.
The White House pushing back as well.
The president didn't have knowledge of the story. The White House didn't have any involvement in the story.
But there is a link to the White House. Butowski and Wheeler met with then Press Secretary Sean Spicer a month before the phony Fox story came out. Butowski telling CNN that he wanted to present audio to Spicer allegedly linking Rich to WikiLeaks.
Did he know why you wanted to meet with him?
No.
So he just took a meeting?
As a matter of fact, yeah, because I said, Sean, I was going to be in town. I had something I wanted to talk to you about. My conversation with Sean about this recording lasted about 1 minute. He said, Ed, I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it. I can't do anything.
Spicer says it was just a 10-minute courtesy meeting and the White House had nothing to do with his story. But the suit claims that Spicer asked to be kept abreast of developments. As for Fox, it calls the accusation that it published the Seth Rich story to detract from the Russia collusion issue, quote, completely erroneous.
Our next guest was a target of Russia's meddling in the U.S. election when his emails were hacked and leaked by Russian hackers. John Podesta, of course, was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign. He joins us now. Mr. Podesta, thanks very much for being here.
Good morning.
What do you think of this surreal and terribly sad story about the murder of Seth Rich and this new development in this lawsuit that connects the White House with this story? Rod Wheeler, who has filed the lawsuit, he was the former D.C. homicide detective who says that the White House was very interested in deflecting away from the Russia investigation and trying to basically pin it on Seth Rich leaking this.
Well, a couple of things, Allison. First of all, I think it was despicable that Fox News was peddling this. And I think what's really amazing is this now connection possibly between the White House. We know that Sean Spicer was at least informed. We know that he went to the same podium and said he didn't know anything about it after that meeting. There are emails implicating the president. So it's really the lowest of the low. And to, on top of that, just last week, the president wined and dined Sean Hannity, who was the chief proponent of peddling this story, and Bill Shine, who had to resign from Fox in the wake of the Roger Ailes scandal. There's some reporting that Shine may be brought into the White House. So the whole thing is horrible, I think, and I think that the Rich family has really suffered a lot as a result of the lack of values both at Fox News and the White House.
You know, whenever the White House is asked, at least in the press briefings, about the Russia investigation and anything, I mean, any of the threads, they pretty quickly deflect to, well, why aren't you investigating Hillary Clinton? And this just happened. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was just asked a question, and you can just see this plain as day. So let me play this for you and get your response.
You guys are focused on a meeting that Don Jr. had no consequence when the Democrats actually colluded with a foreign government like Ukraine. If you want to talk further about a relationship with Russia, look no further than the Clintons, as we've said time and time again. Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 to give a speech to a Russian bank and was personally thanked by Putin for it. Hillary Clinton allowed 1/5 of America's uranium to reserve to be sold to a Russian firm whose investors were Clinton Foundation donors, and the Clinton campaign chairman's brother lobbied against sanctions on Russia's largest bank and failed to report it. If you guys want to talk about having relations, which you seem obsessed with doing, look no further than there.
Mr. Podesta, I don't know if you could see on your screen, but she's reading from notes. In other words, those are talking points.
Yeah.
That she's delivering.
So
go ahead.
You know, this is what they do. They try to divert attention. Those stories that she went through have been knocked down by the mainstream media. But I think just like the Seth Rich story at Fox, what they like to try to do is throw dust someplace else so that they at least give the alt-right media and Fox News something to talk about. When what we really ought to be talking about is that meeting with Donald Trump Jr. And the fact that the president dictated, according to some sources, at least participated in a statement that was grossly misleading. Think about that. This is Trump family values. The kids come to the president and say, Dad, it's time to come clean. We better talk about what happened at this meeting. And what's the dad's response? No, that might hurt me. Put out a grossly misleading statement, which fell apart within a couple of days.
So what do you think the upshot of that is?
They have a lot to answer for.
Yeah, but what do you think in terms of now knowing that the
why
president is involved? Do you think that somebody has been exposed to more legal jeopardy as a result of that?
Yeah, I think that, you heard that from the former prosecutor in the Valerie Plame case. I think they all got together. The special prosecutor, special prosecutor, Mr. Mueller, is certainly going to be suspicious about that. And I think Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, I think put his finger on this. They may not have evidence of collusion yet, but they sure have evidence, and this meeting is evidence of intent to collude. Don Jr.'s statement that, this is great, and influencing the timing of when they might use the information. Remember, this all goes back, they like to say there's no crime. This all goes back to crimes that were committed. The hacking of the DNC, the hacking of my emails, the hacking of other Clinton campaign staff emails. Those are crimes committed by the Russians. And now we know that at a minimum, they were encouraging them to use the fruits of those crimes.
I want to get to an op-ed that you wrote for the Washington Post in which you're offering some free advice to the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, for the White House, from your position as former Chief of Staff. Your first tidbit of advice was don't take the job. He's clearly rejected that advice. So now that he's in the job and in the White House, what advice do you have for him?
Yeah, as I said, that had been overtaken by events before I wrote it. Look, I have tremendous respect for General Kelly. He has a very difficult job. I think day one he got rid of Anthony Scaramucci, or at least he got him out of the communications director job. And I think that the reason his job is going to be so tough is that there's a culture in the White House that really is sort of knows no boundaries. And he's got to contend with the president who, even after appointing him, has said that he's not going to stop tweeting. He's going to continue his current practices. So I think he's tried to show some discipline in the White House. Hopefully that'll be successful. We all want the country to succeed, and he has a tremendous record of service. He's also got to reestablish relationships with leaders on both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill. I think the White House, again, has no credibility, so I think it really is incumbent upon him to personally try, as a man of his word, to establish those relationships. And as I noted in my op-ed, he's got to be the bulwark against interference with this Justice Department investigation. It is clear that no one else there will be, and the president will want to continue to try to interfere in what's going on at the Justice Department. And Kelly has to just be firm in saying, we're not going to do that. That'll get us in more trouble, and really stand up to the president on that one.
And before I let you go, just because you are so close with the Clintons and Hillary Clinton, and you were obviously so involved in her campaign, are you surprised, and is Hillary Clinton surprised at how often the president invokes her name, how often the White House talks about her? We are on Monday, 200 days into the Trump administration, and it seems that not a week goes by where he doesn't mention her.
Yeah, you know, it's unprecedented. You never saw that behavior from any other president who's talking about the person they beat. I think it really just bugs the hell out of him that she got 3 million more votes than he did, and he keeps coming back to that. Obviously, you know, we bear the burden of having lost the Electoral College. So, you know, I lose sleep about that every night. But I think that it's partly strategic to try to deflect attention from his problems. But I think she's really under his skin, because he knows that in the popular vote that she beat him, and beat him soundly.
And what does she say about that?
Well, look, I think she'll have something to say about that when her book comes out in mid-September. And, you know, I think she's reflected on the mistakes that she made and what she might have done different. But I think she'll also talk about where the country is and, you know, how to move forward. That's what she's always done in her life, which is when she's gotten knocked down, she's tried to make a positive contribution coming out of that. And I think that that's what this book will attempt to do.
John Podesta, thanks so much for your perspective.
Thanks for having me on.
Chris.
All right, so only 6 lawmakers have ever voted against confirming FBI director nominees. All right, you got to let it sink in, but the word is that Republicans and Democrats are working together to stabilize insurance markets. Of course, in open defiance of the president, who has said that the ACA should be allowed to implode and fail, and he wanted to do his part by not giving the subsidies that insurance companies are relying on to keep premiums where they are, specifically for lower income people. How real is this? How sustained will it be? There's some other big agenda items to discuss. So let's get the take of Democratic Senator Ed Markey, who serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Forgive my skepticism, but is it true that Democrats are taking this gesture from certain Republicans and trying to do the work of the American people instead of just playing to political advantage?
Well, 2 things happened last Thursday and Friday morning. First, the Democrats and Republicans worked together to put together a set of sanctions on Russia, on Iran, and on North Korea that were done in a bipartisan fashion, and put restrictions upon what Donald Trump could do in lifting those sanctions. And so that was a good moment for the Senate. And then later on that night, on a partisan vote, the Republicans tried hard but couldn't receive all of the votes of all of their members, and they failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And now it seems that Lamar Alexander and other Republicans are reaching across the aisle. And I do think it's happening because I think that's the natural inclination of senators, to try to find a way to solve these problems, because otherwise the insurance markets could collapse, premiums could rise. We have to work together, and I am very heartened that perhaps this was an inflection point, and the Democrats and Republicans are going to start to work together on behalf of the American people. Now, there's no guarantee. There are a lot of other issues, the budget ceiling, a tax bill, but hopefully this is a new phase after 7 months of Donald Trump saying it's my way or the highway. It's the rule of Trump, not the rule of law. Maybe we now are moving on to a new era where the Senate exerts its constitutional powers and lets the executive wait for the United States Senate to dispose. The president can propose, but now the Senate seems to begin to understand and work towards having us exercise our prerogatives as well.
So how do you reconcile this suggested move away from what you could call tragic comedy and towards comedy, ITY, with you and others voting down Chris Wray, which has never been done before, which looked like a political tactic, and threats about not going with Republicans on the debt ceiling, which is upcoming at the end of September? How real is this intention to try to work with the other side, given those two moves?
Well, my concern is over the issue of surveillance and this tension that exists between privacy, liberty on the one hand, and security on the other hand. As each one of these devices becomes more and more ubiquitous, we have to decide whether or not we want legally to have a backdoor be built into every device so that there can be ubiquitous surveillance in our country. And I think that in the public statements that were made, I did not hear an answer which gave me confidence that balance towards the protection of the privacy, the protection of the liberty of Americans was basically a part of his philosophy. So I've been working on that issue for 20 years, going back to the Clinton administration, trying to build a Clipper chip into every one of these devices. And it's something that I have continued, along with Senator Ron Wyden, to raise concerns about in our country.
All right, so it was policy, not personal, when it came to Chris Wray. And that leads us to the last topic this morning, which is if you want to talk about Congress taking its power back, and in your case, the Senate, there is no topic that goes under that heading more directly than the abrogation of constitutional duty to declare war that Congress has, not the president, and giving presidents, not just Trump, Obama before him, Bush before him, arguably Clinton before that, that you've given away that duty to the president. So now you want to start debating the authorization for the use of military force. To remind people, we're still operating under one written in 2001, yet the world has changed so much. What are you hoping happens this time?
Well, in 2001, we voted for an authorization for the use of military force. It was after 2 planes were hijacked from Logan Airport in Boston, which I represented, and flown into the World Trade Center. Thousands of people were killed, and we wanted justice for those who had perpetrated that act. Now we're 16 years later. No one who voted for that authorization for the use of military force thought that it would be used as a blank check to take us into country after country, after group after group. So it's time for us to begin a new debate about which countries, which groups, which level of force, which types of force can be used under that 2001 authorization. We need a new authorization, and then we need to have sunset provisions included so that we periodically redebate how that new authorization is being used. We haven't had a full-blown senatorial or House debate on this issue in 16 years, and no one who voted for that first authorization ever imagined how that power would be used.
And there is a suggestion that Congress has been ducking their duty, allowing presidents to carry the ball. No president's going to say no. But, Senator, let's see if that changes with this debate. We'll stay on the story. Thank you for being on.
The New York Times is reporting this morning that the Justice Department plans to take on affirmative action in college admissions. According to a document obtained by the Times, the plan is to try to protect white applicants from discrimination. Joining us to discuss is Matt Schlapp. He's the former political director for George W. Bush and current chairman for the American Conservative Union. And Van Jones, he's a CNN political commentator and a former special advisor to President Obama. Gentlemen, great to have both of you. Matt Schlapp, what is wrong with affirmative action?
Nothing's wrong with it. I think it was well intended. The idea is that when you have populations that have faced serious discrimination, the government steps in to make sure that people are not doing things that break the law, that discriminate against people. But
so why now try to change it?
Well, the whole concept is eventually you want these programs to go away. Eventually we want to realize Dr. King's dream of a colorblind society.
And have we gotten there? Is it time? Do you think that it has outlived now its usefulness?
Well, at the American Conservative Union, we have this project called the Family Prosperity Index. And what you're seeing in politics and what you're seeing in culture is there's actually tremendous hardship that is really wreaking havoc on rural white America. Opioid addiction, suicides are going through the roof. So at some point in all of these programs, especially in these college admissions, Allison, you're saying to one person, we're going to give you a leg up, we're going to give you the slot, but inevitably, in every case, you're actually taking slots away as well. And as a country, we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we have the right standards in these programs?
Van, your response.
Well, I think that we're seeing now a pretty disturbing pattern with Jeff Sessions and with the Department of Justice. We really should be trying to, especially for, we'll get to the white community, which needs a lot of help as well, especially rural. We agree on that. But you've got some communities that you really need to be trying to open doors of opportunity and close prison doors. Sessions seems to be going in the opposite direction. He seems to be wanting to double down on the failed drug war, which is going to have more young urban youth going to prison, and then ratchet back on the scholarships and the support to get them to college. You put that together, and you've got a Justice Department that seems to have a very negative and disturbing view of the future for young African Americans, for young Latinos and others. The other thing is, when you look at the total approach, you also want more people voting, and you want better policing. He seems to be wanting to take a step back on the policing standards and yet not be helping on the voting standards. So you have a whole, this is a pattern here that's very, very
I understand.
negative.
And so you're looking at the big picture and the pattern. But on affirmative action specifically, what about Matt's point, the conservative viewpoint, that poor whites are struggling also, and if in college admissions you always favor black or Latino applicants, that it's now no longer the goal of a level playing field isn't working exactly?
Well, the numbers don't bear out the concern yet. You have to admit, at some point, you could get to a point where you're overcompensating. But if you look at the numbers, they don't bear that out. But let's not conflate apples and oranges here. Matt is 100% correct. When you're talking about rural poverty, what's going on in small-town America, we have not done enough. Democrats or Republicans have not done enough to respond to those crises. But I think it's a mistake. Rather than turning on each other, we should turn to each other. We need to be doing a lot better by all kids, especially low-income kids. But poverty is not the same as racial discrimination. You got to be able to deal with both.
Can I do something very dangerous? Can I also agree with Van? That I also think that our prison system and our incarceration system should be focused on violent criminals. I do fear that we have this lock 'em up mentality. We put people in prison who we don't like instead of who we fear. And I want to focus on violent criminals. So I do think Van has a good point there. I think that when it comes to all these questions, we have to have a fair understanding that when you hurt one American to help another American, and you do it for all these reasons in employment or specifically at colleges, we have to see what the implications are for the person who was left behind. And I just think in 21st century America, with all of our problems, and our problems are on our television sets all day long, but at some point we have to say, don't we all have a fair shake? Haven't we done a good job for half a century to try to change our laws to make sure that we are colorblind and that everybody has...
It just depends on if you think that we're done with that work. If you think it's now a level playing field.
I would say no. I don't think it's a level play. I don't think we ever get to perfection or nirvana on in this world.
So then,
but I think it gets better.
Students still need some help.
I think it gets better. I think your standards need to lower. So I think what you have to do with the judicial standards to determine...
I disagree with a couple things here, though.
Well, let me just say, I'll quickly summarize. There are legal standards on whether or not you can have these programs and when these programs have done what they needed to do. And I actually think the scrutiny standards need to be raised so that you only have these programs when you can see real racial... You're not having racial discrimination at Harvard, at Yale, at Princeton, at Berkeley. It's absurd.
Okay, Van.
Well, on this point, I see it differently. First of all, the Supreme Court has already ratcheted the standards up pretty high. They just revisited this issue a little while ago, and basically what you've got to be able to show is a whole number of things. You've got to be able to show that there's a pattern of discrimination, not just at that institution, but that's important. It also turns out that our Supreme Court says that colleges do have an interest in making sure that the student body is diverse. It can't be overdone, but that is a problem. If you could come up with a situation where if you have the wrong set of standards, the entire student body could look exactly one way.
But hold on 1 second. But bottom line, Van, are you comfortable that the Justice Department is going to look into whether it's time to rework affirmative action?
No, because we just went through this with the Supreme Court, and if the Justice Department wants to lean forward and try to deal with racial discrimination, you still have states in this country that are blocking people from voting aggressively, according to the Supreme Court. You still have police departments that are discriminating. You still have real serious barriers. They're backing away from that, and they're focusing on this. I think it's a complete misallocation of resources.
Okay, we have to leave it there.
Sorry.
You got the first word. Thanks, Matt.
I'll come back and get the last word.
Please do. Thank you very much, Van. Matt, thank you very much. Chris.
All right, tough story. Routine traffic stop turns into an incredibly dangerous situation. You watching your screen? How did this officer get himself to safety? Look at...
Presidents demand that the Senate change their rules to pass bills by a simple majority.
There are not the votes in the Senate, as I've said repeatedly to the President and to all of you, to change the rules of the Senate.
It comes as the Senate Health Committee's influential Republican chairman also pushes back against the president's threat to let Obamacare implode by stopping payments to insurance companies. Senator Lamar Alexander proposing bipartisan legislation that would do exactly the opposite.
Our proposal is that by mid-September, we will see if we can agree on a way to stabilize the individual insurance market.
Senate Republicans also criticizing the administration's shifting story about the president's role in crafting his son's misleading initial statement about the reason for the June 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer.
When you put out a misleading statement, it's going to be hard to convince people to stop looking at other things.
The White House admitting Tuesday that the president was involved.
The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
Contradicting repeated denials from the president's legal team.
The president was not involved in the drafting of the statement. I wasn't involved in the statement drafting at all, nor was the president. The president didn't sign off on anything.
Sarah Sanders denying reports that President Trump personally dictated the deceptive statement and attempting to shift the narrative.
Everybody wants to try to make this some story about misleading. The only thing I see misleading is a year's worth of stories that have been fueling a false narrative about this Russia collusion.
The ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee investigating possible collusion disagreeing.
This administration continues to say, particularly vis-a-vis Russia, there's nothing there. Yet they don't act that way at all.
The administration continues to try to shore up its base on the right. The New York Times is reporting this morning that the administration is looking at suing universities for affirmative action policies that may discriminate against white students. There are also proposals for new trade policy, a new trade case against China, as well as introduction of legislation that would essentially introduce a skill-based immigration policy in the United States. Chris and Allison, back to you.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much for all of that. Let's bring in our political panel. We have CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza. CNN political analysts, David Gregory and Sean Avlon. David, I don't know what we're doing, David Gregory. Is it your sense that Republicans, leading Republicans in the Senate, have reached some sort of tipping point where even beyond Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Jeff Flake, that they are now more willing to come out and publicly split with the president?
Well, more clearly they are. There's no question about it, because I think they feel emboldened to take on a president who's increasingly weak, although he still has his base behind him of Republicans who put him into office. But this is a president who continues to provoke them and to challenge them from the outside, as if he's not the head of the Republican Party. And he's a president who's not leveling with the American people. The White House lies about things it should not lie about. This Russia investigation is something that grows bigger because of how the president and his team handles it, period. You want to wiggle out from that? Then level with the American people. It's that simple. And Republicans on Capitol Hill are increasingly paying the penalty for that, as they have a president who lacks credibility. If you don't tell the truth about some things, you can't be believed on other things. And the president's credibility, the White House's credibility has suffered, and makes it very difficult for him then to influence Republicans to do what he says they ought to do. The party is increasingly moving away from him, moving away from this White House as it tries to chart its own future and face voters on its own.
Sean Avalon, Tim Scott in the Washington Post. Quote, "We work for the American people. We do not work for the president. We should do what's good for the administration as long as that does not in any way, shape, or form make it harder on the American people." There had been this patience or impatience for a tipping point. When will these people in the GOP take back their own party? When will they own their own mandate? Last night, I heard one of the conservatives say, it's not just about the base. It's about the fact that the president is being base. And, we have to stand against that. We're real conservatives. How real do you think this is?
I think it's real, and it's gonna become more defined, and here's why. First of all, as you look at the president's approval numbers, it's not just that he has the lowest approval rating in history, recorded history among the American public. Yes, he's strong among the base, but that's weakening. More importantly, most Republican senators who ran in 2016 ran ahead of Donald Trump. He had reverse coattails. He didn't bring them over the finish line. They ran ahead of him. So they've got a mandate from their voters that should inspire them to straighten their civic backbone a bit and to start reasserting basic separation of powers. The other factor, of course, is that people are getting exhausted from defending the indefensible or having positions they're being told to taken out undercut by the president's actions or statements on any given day. So if that all of a sudden gets people to start thinking about the national interest as opposed to special interests, if that starts getting people to think about strengthening separation of powers for the good of the republic, that's a good thing.
And Crystal, they're not just thinking about it and talking about it, they're actually doing things. I mean, you can see actual policy. Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee is working in a bipartisan way with Patty Murray of Washington to strengthen and stabilize Obamacare, not to repeal or replace, as the president has wanted. They are beginning to take actual policy actions that seem to be at odds with what the president has said he wants.
Oh, not seem to be, Allison. I think are directly at odds. I mean, Donald Trump's solution in the wake of the failure of the Senate to pass a health care bill is essentially let's let this fail. Let's let the Obamacare collapse under its own weight, and then everyone will come begging to us for a solution, and Democrats will get blamed. He literally has said basically that. I think what you see in Lamar Alexander is a guy, let's not forget, this is a guy with a pretty storied political career. He's run for president twice. He was in the leadership in the Senate. He took a step back from that. But this is someone who's fundamentally sort of a problem solver, someone who's been in public service for a very long time, and someone who is not going to follow the president's lead and just let people in his state of Tennessee or in any state watch as this thing totally collapses. So I think the fear factor, to the extent it ever existed with Donald Trump, is essentially gone. That yes, they know he will take shots at them. Yes, they know he may attack them by name, but no, they are no longer as afraid of him as they might have been earlier. And never forget this. The Lamar Alexanders of the world were never Donald Trump allies. They voted for him probably because they preferred him to Hillary Clinton. These are never people that are going to be deeply loyal to him. So it doesn't take a lot to peel them away. And I think he's given them more than enough over these 6 months to convince them that staying with him at all times on all things is politically perilous.
All right, so let's talk about, David, the different irons that are in the fire here. Okay, so we have this dynamic about, let's call it the enough is enough, maybe.
Sure, I like it.
You have the president's reaction to it, which is to do what he does best. You give him opposition, he attacks you. The president over the weekend tweeting Republicans in the Senate will never win if they don't go to a 51 majority vote now. This is taking care of the filibuster rule once and for all. They look like fools and are just wasting time. So he provoked them. They now seem to be responding by that to say, no, we're going to do our business. And remember why it matters, David. Set this up for us. September. You have September Morn coming there. You have the debt ceiling. You have the, the ability to get a budget done. Those are both in September. September Morn, Neil Diamond.
I got it.
So how big is that?
I think it's really important. You also have tax reform. Now, this is something that you saw Democrats say, oh, we'll get involved in this. Let's try to craft something bigger with our priorities as well, forcing Majority Leader McConnell to say, no, they're out of sync with Republican priorities. We'll probably have to do this with reconciliation, just 51 votes. But the president provokes the Republicans. You have the leader of the Republicans, McConnell, reminding the White House, hey, we didn't have the votes on health care, period. So it doesn't matter whether we just had to reach that 50-vote threshold. We didn't have it. And the president knows this or should know it, but still wants to cast himself as being outside the Republican Party. And I think it's interesting if you look at Arizona alone. Look, John McCain, who has now returned to his maverick self, with this horrible cancer diagnosis that he's received and the role he played on health care, well, he had to get closer to Trump to win re-election, but now has become more independent. And here's Jeff Flake, the junior senator, a real conservative out of Arizona, who knows that Trump is going to support a primary opponent to him. He comes out with this book kind of reasserting conservatism against Donald Trump. I think this is significant on all these fights you're talking about, from taxes to raising the debt ceiling, ultimately on the budget, that there's a kind of conservative backlash going on now against Trump that we haven't seen really since the campaign.
Quickly wrap this up.
Look, it's about damn time, and here's why. Senators historically have been the place that cooled the civic debate, that thought about the national interest, that tried to take into account as bipartisan coalitions whenever possible. The fact that that's been degraded in recent decades by an increasing ideological polarization of the party, that's helped lead to Donald Trump. But if this is what's required, the constant insults from the Oval Office is what's required to have senators start restoring their best selves, their best traditions, good. Let's have it happen again and help us all.
September Morn, we dance the dance into a brand new day. Nothing. Nothing.
Green Day. Green
Nothing.
Day.
Go on.
I thought she was going to pick up on that in a second.
I need the music in order to hum a few bars of that.
Neil Diamond?
Oh, I know.
That's
No,
us.
I know it's Neil Diamond.
Not Jersey, but still.
No, it's not true.
All right, the White House finally conceding that President Trump did weigh in on his son's misleading statement about that meeting with a Russian lawyer. Oh, who cares? They said he had nothing to do with it. That's what his lawyers said. Why do they keep changing the story? Next, we dance the dance into a crowd. On Don Jr.'s meeting with Russians at Trump Tower. Now they're changing their story. Let's bring back the panel. Chris Cillizza, David Gregory, John Avlon. Relevance.
I mean, look, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is trying to build back a credibility gap, and she undermined it dramatically yesterday. First of all, we know Don Jr.'s statement that they put out was fundamentally false, right? We know that. We also know the spin around it, and the fact that the president apparently dictated it was contradicted by Jay Sekulow, the president's lawyer, on CNN and other outlets. So there's really no place to go. So instead, they're trying to call anyone who's asking questions a Russophobe. But that was a low. That did not comport with reality, and they knew it.
Chris Cillizza, here are the repercussions. I mean, according to Senator Lindsey Graham, why this matters. Listen to this.
One, he put his son in jeopardy. Now we have to wonder about what Don Jr.'s team will tell you about what he actually did. If you didn't know about the email, the statement may have fooled you. If you know about the email with Don Jr., then it's a misleading statement. But it sounds like...
So you just don't know what to trust is part of the problem.
The issue here, well, I mean, there are a lot of issues. John touched on one, which is just fundamentally, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said yesterday, is a direct contradiction to what the White House has been saying. Number two, remember that the Trump White House, Jay Sekulow, Donald Trump, has essentially said, look, I didn't know anything about this. You know, I was sort of clueless about this meeting. I wasn't there. I didn't know anything about it. They've now said he weighed in. Now, that's a tough term to figure out. I don't know what does weighed in mean. Does it mean he looked at it? Does it mean he edited it? Does it mean he dictated it, as the Washington Post reported? But regardless, he had a hand in that statement. We now know that. That statement was very carefully crafted in that there's nothing, if you look at it, there is nothing that is factually definitely wrong It was primarily about Russian adoptions. We don't have evidence to suggest that if it was 20 minutes, 11 of the minutes were about Russian adoptions. Okay. It was not a campaign issue. That's true. Russian adoptions weren't a campaign issue. What's left out of it, though, is massive about, why did the meeting take place? Yeah. Who was going to be there? So if Donald Trump really knew limited information, according to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that's a pretty carefully worded statement for someone who doesn't know much about it. That's what really sort of got my siren up. It is not a statement you would make if somebody said, yeah, we had this meeting. It's a statement you would make that would suggest you knew that there was things you weren't saying and you were carefully using terms to keep yourself out of any factual jeopardy there.
But I think Allison is spot on about this, David, in that, people rush to illegality or to impeachment. And it's a mistake because they're very high bars. Yes. But trust is a main measure that seems to be failing in this situation. John Dean and Robert Ray, so the Whitewater Council and the famous Watergate counselor, both agreed that what seems to be going on here is a question of trust on both sides. That the president doesn't trust the people around him to support his innocence, that he has done nothing wrong. He has nothing to conceal, and therefore it is okay for him to disrupt the narrative that's out there that suggests anything different. And as a result, they twist the truth, they misinterpret or misstate at a minimum, and that then hurts the trust of the media and those outside their own little circle to trust anything they say. Fair appraisal?
Yeah, I think that's really it, because the original premise is that this is ridiculous. This investigation is ridiculous. As Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, it's being overblown and there's anonymous sources. It's okay to lie. It's okay to mislead. It's okay to misinterpret. And I'm sorry, we can parse this in our remaining time here on television. They don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. This was the same team and the same president who brought us the birther lie to launch himself into national politics. So he weighed in as any father would on behalf of his president. Number one, this is why you don't have kids involved in your campaigns or working for you, because it's a conflict of interest. That's number one. Number two, no, sorry, doesn't pass any kind of rational test. You think Donald Trump was not actively involved? He didn't just weigh in. He dictated the statement, and his lawyer said he didn't. That was not the truth, period. And yet we're supposed to believe them on other things. He looks like he's got something to hide. There may be nothing there, but why do they keep acting like there is?
John Avlon, we need to talk now about the very strange and tragic story of Seth Rich. Sometimes when I'm out in the real world, people ask me all the time, what is fake news? They're confused. What does it mean? This is Exhibit A of what a fake news story took hold, unfortunately, on FoxNews.com about the circumstances surrounding the murder of Seth Rich, DNC staffer. They, it turns out, fabricated, according to the primary source, a former D.C. homicide detective named Rod Wheeler, who was trying to look into the murder of Seth Rich. It turns out it was a botched burglary. He says that FoxNews.com fabricated quotes of his to make it appear as though there was that he was the leaker of the DNC emails, not Russia. Here is how the White House spun this yesterday.
The president had no knowledge of the story, and it's completely untrue that the White House involvement in the story. And beyond that, this is ongoing litigation, and I'd refer you to the actual parties involved, which aren't the White House.
Rod Wheeler, the person who was investigating this, says he did have a meeting at the White House. He did get emails saying the president's very interested in this story and how you're going to spend it.
Right, and those emails were sent to him, and texts were sent to him by a prominent Republican donor who Chris spoke to last night, who inserted himself in this. So what you've got, right? So you've got sort of a collusion between apparently Fox News, one of their contributors who's a private investigator, one of their reporters in a story that was subsequently deleted when it came under scrutiny, and a Republican donor who's got direct access to the White House, and saying that the president in these communications is directly involved in encouraging them to go forward. The reason this is so troubling isn't just the smearing of a dead GNC staffer's name and the attempt to deflect what is demonstrably true, that Russia influenced the election, which all our intelligence agencies agree, on the DNC and on this kid, right? It's also that we have seen the manipulation and intentional distortion of the term fake news to mean anything that the White House feels discomfort at confronting. But this is laid out in this lawsuit is a clear evidence of fake news, something totally concocted, totally for ideological and partisan reasons, fashioned out of whole cloth that comes collapsing upon itself and is being coordinated with the White House. It cannot be said enough how outrageous this is. This has emails and texts that would appear to be a smoking gun. We'll see how it's litigated. But it really pulls the curtain back. And the fact that the curtain's being pulled back on the folks who are trying to say that independent journalism is fake news should infuriate everyone, let alone the family of Seth Rich and anyone involved in this larger investigation into Russia.
Chris Cillizza, let me tee up a piece of sound for you that Ed Butowski gave us last night here on CNN.
I never talked to anybody at the White House. By the way, I've never talked to President Trump in my life. And President Trump nor the White House has anything to do with any of this.
So he said in a voicemail to the detective something different. He said in a text something different.
That the president was
that the White House was involved, that the president had read it, that the White House was waiting for the article to come out. So it was all over the place. Now he's in denial mode, not unusual given the fact that there's a subject of litigation. But what is the point here?
Well, look, it's a pending lawsuit. This is Rod Wheeler, and Butowski's disagreeing. But this is, to John's point, what you
feeling climate change's impact in every